Lesson 3.3, What Makes Us Feel Hungry or Full? The goals of this lesson are to teach students what role our brains play in telling us to start and stop eating, and to engage students in conversation about how we can override our hunger and satiety signals. At the end of this lesson, students should be able to explain hunger and satiety signals, explain how the hypothalamus regulates hunger, and compare and contrast drug and food addiction. We'll achieve these goals through a Socratic discussion and by viewing 2 video clips. To prepare for this lesson, you will need to review the key scientific concepts that will be presented throughout the lesson. They include the physiology of hunger, including hormones released from the body that travel to the brain, and how the signals get interpreted by the hypothalamus. And in the dopamine reward pathway, what it is, and how is addiction related. You can review the scientific content in the background reading provided for you in the teacher primer, the teacher manual, and the student workbook. The teacher primer provides in-depth knowledge about the scientific content presented in this lesson. The teacher manual or lesson plan provides a minute-by-minute explanation of the lesson structure, including instructions on how to manage the discussion and the activity. The student workbook provides additional explanations for the students. You will need to print out 1 activity worksheet per student. For the homework, print out 1 homework worksheet and 1 copy of the reading per student. The key points of this lesson's do now are that the brain regulates eating based on internal and external cues. An example of an internal cue is hormones from your gut telling your brain that you are hungry or full. And an example of an external cue is smelling a delicious food and suddenly feeling hungry. Through reinforcement, we can be conditioned to behave a certain way, like always wanting popcorn when we watch movies. We'll get there by having a discussion with the students. You will probe the students to get them to identify some internal and external cues that tell us to stop or start eating. Like Pavlov's dogs, we may want to eat food due to conditioning rather than because of a physiological need for calories and nourishment. Remind students of the definition of addiction and see if they can see similarities between this and overeating. The key points of this lesson's discussion are that through reinforcement we can be conditioned to behave certain ways, similar to Pavlov's dogs. When the body has sufficient nutrition, hormones are released that travel to the hypothalamus to tell us to stop eating. For example, insulin, leptin, and peptide hormones. When our body needs more nutrients and calories, ghrelin is released from the stomach, which travels to the hypothalamus to tell us to start eating. In certain conditions, these signals may not work correctly, like in Prader-Willi syndrome, anorexia, and bulimia nervosa. We'll get there by engaging students in a Socratic discussion and by watching a video clip. The discussion starts with linking Pavlov's dog's experiments to us. We could be conditioned to respond to outside cues that make us feel hungry, but how does this actually work? The next series of slides discuss the hormones that are released from the digestive tract and adipose tissue that tell us to either start or stop eating. After learning about the hunger and satiety pathways, you will show your students some examples of disorders that can occur when these pathways are not functioning normally, including anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa and Prader-Willi syndrome. Students will watch a short video clip about a Prader-Willi patient that constantly feels hungry. Students should take notes from this lesson using the Lesson 3.3 worksheet. By the end of this discussion, students should be able to think of ways that the hunger and satiety pathways may lead to obesity. You can review each of these hormones and where and when they are released in the teacher's manual and the teacher primer. The key point of the lesson's activity is that in the brain, addiction to food is similar to drug addiction. We'll get there by having students watch a video clip about the dopamine reward pathway and addiction. The clip focuses on how reward pathways in the brain regulate impulses to use drugs and to eat. We will learn more about the dopamine reward pathway in tomorrow's lesson. The key point of this lesson's wrap-up is for students to argue whether they believe food addiction is a disease. We'll get there by having a short discussion. This is a current debate amongst researchers and policymakers, so there is no correct answer. The answer to this question has implications for treatment of obesity. The key points of this lesson's homework are that every research article asks one big question, which should be explained and answered by the end of the article, and that levels of hormones related to hunger and satiety are changed during weight loss, but don't reach the normal levels of a lean person that was never overweight. We'll get there by having students read a scientific article using the QMDC model as a guide. Caution: you may want to reserve extra time at the end of your lesson to go over this homework, as it can be challenging for many students. Students don't need to complete this homework until lesson 3.5. Reading a primary scientific article can take a lot of time if you're not accustomed to it, so provide students with extra time to complete the homework. QMDC stands for Question, Method, Data, and Conclusion, and is a tool students can use to pick out key points. After grappling with the homework using the worksheet as a guide, let students know that you will work through the paper together as a class. Students can sometimes confuse the hunger and satiety pathways presented here with the reward pathways we will learn about in the next lesson. The hunger and satiety signals make us start or stop eating, whereas the reward pathways give us a sense of pleasure when we eat, especially if we eat our favorite foods. Students may want to know more about the causes of eating disorders. There are many things that are linked to eating disorders, such as societal pressures, genetics, and personality disorders such as obsessive-compulsive disorder. It is still unknown whether the hormonal and neurological changes seen in eating disorder patients causes the disorder or if it is in response to the disorder, but eating disorder patients are less likely to respond to signals telling them to eat and get less pleasure from eating. At the end of this lesson, students should be able to explain hunger and satiety signals, explain how the hypothalamus regulates hunger, and compare and contrast drug and food addiction. Students should leave this unit being familiar with the hunger and satiety pathways. They will use this information again through the remainder of Unit 3. We will revisit the idea of food addiction in more detail in Lesson 3.4. Don't forget that if you have any questions, concerns, or feedback to let us know. You can contact any of the CTSE team members and we will be happy to help.